Hi, my name is Nathan. You're watching Nice at Dice, and today I'm taking a look back at the past year, 2020, and I wanted to highlight basically my three biggest disappointments when it comes to board games over the past year. So I had the opportunity to play quite a few new games. Some of them were brand new games, and some of them were just new to me. For the most part, I enjoyed the games that I played. So I do my best to research games before I buy them. I'll look at other people's reviews of the game, read up on the game, maybe even take a peek at the rule book in a digital format if I can. So I try to be well informed about the games that I buy, and therefore I end up liking most of the games that I buy, some more than others. But I did have at least three games this past year that were new to me. I played them, and I was just really disappointed by them. So I wanted to talk about those, not really to be down on the game so much, but just if my experience can save somebody else some time or money, I'd like to be able to help other people out in that way. So starting from number 3 and working our way up to number 1, I'm going to mention each of these games, and I'll mention right now I have done full reviews of each of these games. I'll put links in the description to this video, to those videos if you want to go see my full review. I'm just going to be kind of giving the gist of what the game is and why I didn't like it here. So number 3 is a game called Escape the Dark Sector. And this was a game that I pretty much picked up on a whim because it just had a really cool look to it. It has a really nice aesthetic. It's kind of this like dark and gritty sci-fi style to it. And the basic premise is it's a either solo or cooperative game. The players are astronauts stranded on a space station, and you're trying to make your way across the space station to where your ship is so you can escape the dark sector. It's a really fun premise. Again, the aesthetics are great, but what I really didn't enjoy about the game is that it basically boils down to just rolling dice over and over again and hoping that you get good results from those dice. And the game is weighted in such a way that you'll more often lose than win, which is in itself not a bad thing, but it's just the fact that it's just so random. There's very little skill, very little strategy or tactics involved, and so it just feels like rolling dice over and over again, hoping for good results, and for the most part, not getting the results you need. So that was the game. I rank it number 3 on this list because while it was fairly disappointing, it wasn't a game that I had really high hopes for. I bought it kind of on a whim just based on the aesthetic of it, and the premise of it sounded cool. So I wasn't heavily invested in the game. And it turned out being, just not a great game. So number 2 is a game called Dungeons and Dragons Adventure Begins. This game was touted as like an introduction to the world of D&D. Now, I didn't realize when I bought it that it is a children's game. Perhaps I should have realized that. Although, to my thinking, it's like there's plenty of adults who have never played D&D. So if you're producing a game, a board game of sorts, to introduce people to D&D, that could just as easily appeal to adults as children. But it's a children's game. So that was one thing. Buying it, I wasn't really expecting a children's game, and then immediately it became obvious. It's like, oh, this is a children's game. So it was a bit of a letdown from that respect. But I still tried to give it a fair evaluation from the perspective of like, well, if I was a kid, 11, 12, picking this game up, what would I have thought of it? Or if I was trying to introduce D&D to some kids, how would I feel about using this game to do that? And overall, while the game, it's a cool idea to have a game like this, and there were a few cool concepts in the game, overall the game was just really disappointing. I felt like it just really failed to deliver on the promise of what this game could have been. So part of that was just certain mechanisms that were like, they would introduce this idea like, oh, you can customize your character. Like, that's really cool. That's something that I always enjoy about tabletop role-playing games in general, including D&D, is the idea that, oh, I can create my own character. I can customize them to my liking. The game has that, but all the customization essentially means nothing when you actually play the game. So things like that, where it's like, oh, this is a cool idea, I can customize my character, but then the actual application of the idea just completely fell flat. And then there's a lot of like really silly like potty humor kind of, silliness to the game, which again, if it's for kids, I guess that might appeal to kids. But just thinking about it from my perspective, if I was like 11 or 12 picking up this game, I would have already been playing like some of the early Final Fantasy games, like on the Super Nintendo, Chrono Trigger on the Super Nintendo, Legend of Zelda, like those kinds of games. And then coming from that into this, I would have been like, what is this? This is so ridiculous. Like, I want to be like a hero on a quest and like doing something epic and saving the world. And it's like, yeah, there's kind of the idea of that here, but in practice, it's just this really silly little like party game for kids. But even it's not even good for that, because then they have these combat encounters that just kind of slow everything down. Like if you're just playing it as like, oh, this is going to be a silly kids party game with a light D&D theme, then you're going to be disappointed when you get to the combat encounters, and that's going to slow the party down. So anyhow, that was basically my experience with that game. I felt like it's a game that had a lot of potential, but just failed to live up to that potential. And number one, my biggest disappointment of 2020 was a game called Legacy of Dragonholt. Now, if you really want to know all the reasons why I was disappointed with this game, go watch my review. But basically what it boils down to is I feel like the game failed to communicate well with the players. For starters, it's not clear what this game is meant to be. Is it supposed to be a sort of like GM-less role-playing game? Like at times it kind of feels like that's what it's supposed to be, but it doesn't actually advertise itself as that. Is it just like a choose-your-own adventure book? That's kind of what it is, but it doesn't really advertise itself like that. So it's just a weird sort of thing where going into it, I'm not quite sure what this is supposed to be. And then it turns out to be kind of a choose-your-own adventure book, which is fine. That's a cool idea. I like that. But then it's like the scenario in the story right away, they make it seem like, oh, there's this conspiracy, an assassination attempt. You need to find out who the conspirators are and maybe stop them before they can attempt another assassination. But then when you play the game, it turns out no amount of investigation is going to change the outcome of the scenario. Investigating the conspiracy is completely pointless. Another thing that they tell you is like, hey, we're gonna need the villagers on our side when push comes to shove at the end of this. So why don't you take some time, go around the village, get to know people, see who you can help, try and build a rapport with the people in the town. Okay, that's cool. And you can do that, and it does benefit you in the sense that it gets you interacting with these other characters, and you get to know the characters, and that's kind of fun. But at the end of the game, it doesn't matter. Like, there's no reward in the game for doing that. So that's the thing that I find frustrating, is that the game repeatedly tells you to do things and then doesn't reward you for doing them. And at the base, like, foundation of the scenario, it's telling you, investigate the conspiracy, get on the good side of the townspeople. Doing those two things has no effect on the outcome of the game in the end of the scenario. And then there's a specific point in the game where a character in the game who you have no reason not to trust, and the character is a good person. It's not like they're a secret bad guy or anything. So they have no reason to sabotage you, but they give you advice to go do something. And if you go do that and spend time on this thing that they told you to go do, it actually messes you up from accomplishing a really important mission. And so I just found that so frustrating. It's like, why are the game designers, by way of this character, telling me to do something that's sabotaging me? So there were just a lot of things like that in the game that it just felt like the game failed to communicate, or at least to follow through on the things that it communicated. Like if they wanted the game to be about investigating a conspiracy and getting to know the townsfolk, like that's cool. you're telling me that, but then design the game in such a way that that is what the game is actually about. So anyway, those are the reasons why I was just really disappointed with Legacy of Dragonholt. Again, that's probably one of my longest reviews if you want to go get a real detailed breakdown of Legacy of Dragonholt and why it was so disappointing. And again, I think one of the reasons why it was so disappointing is because just reading about the game in general, I had a lot of high expectations. I thought this was going to be a really cool game. And it's also a game that requires a certain commitment of time. I think we ended up playing like five or six sessions to get through the whole story. And so, you know, like with the D&D Adventure Begins game, we played that once. It was just one evening, a couple of hours. And I was like, man, this is just not what I expected or what I wanted out of this, right? You know, so it was disappointing, but it wasn't like, you know, it's not like Legacy of Dragonholt. I spent 5, 6, maybe 7 evenings invested in this game, and it turned it out just to be such a big miss for me. So anyway, those are my 3 biggest disappointments of 2020. Again, they were Escape the Dark Sector at number 3, D&D Adventure Begins is number 2, and Legacy of Dragonholt is number 1. If you want to see my full reviews, they are in the description of this video. Again, my name is Nathan. You're watching Nice at Dice. Thank you so much for watching, and you enjoy the rest of your day.